From building Super Bowl rosters to shaping the future of Iowa football, how did Scott Pioli land in Iowa City, and what does it mean for the Hawkeyes?
You are Locked On Hawkeyes, your daily podcast on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, welcome in. I'm Trent Condon, and this is the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. I've been covering the Hawkeyes for over 20 years on the radio here in the state of Iowa, including currently on the Iowa Sports Radio Network. You can hear me weekdays from noon to 2 talking the world of sports and plenty of Hawkeyes with Ken Miller. You can catch me on our flagship 106.3 KXNO in Des Moines, along with the network with stations in Sioux City, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, and the Quad Cities, all part of the Iowa Sports Radio Network. Today's episode of Locked On Hawkeyes is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, a lot of recruiting conversation today. We're going to take a look at the basketball programs. A name that we threw out earlier in the week appears to be off the board. The women's program is getting some interest from some of the top level players in the country. What that means for Jan Jensen's squad, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, and maybe why basketball recruiting is going at a different level than it once did. We will get into that. Scott Dochterman from The Athletic will join us. We'll talk Hawkeyes with him. We'll talk a little bit about Scott Pioli and what the House settlement case means for the University of Iowa athletic department and how it's going to be going forward. But we begin today with the news that came out early in the week, and that was Scott Pioli now has been a part of this staff, been part of Iowa football in an analyst role since dating back to the fall. So if you don't know the name Scott Pioli, he is a guy that is credited being the architect of the New England Patriots of the early 2000s. He was the guy that, yes, was the guy that drafted Tom Brady, but also building their roster year in and year out. When you look at that Patriots roster and what him and Bill Belichick were able to build, Scott Pioli was a huge piece of that. He was the architect as they won over 70% of their games from 2000 to 2008. But you remember back to those teams, and it was the depth that they were able to create. It was the veterans that they were able to bring in. He was a big part of putting that together and doing it. He was a three-time director of player personnel. He was the executive, of the year on that front a couple of different times. Now, I know it didn't go very well in Kansas City. There was a guy he wanted to hire. It was Kirk Ferentz, but that didn't happen. Todd Haley was the first coach that he hired after firing Herm Edwards right when he went on the job. It didn't go very well from there. Charlie Weiss came in. Look, things don't go well. And that is the reality of the business. And not going to be around very long if things are not going very well. They got the number one pick late in his tenure. And it was also the year that, yes, your number one pick is a left tackle from Central Michigan, and Eric Fisher, who turned out to be a fine player. But when you're drafting number one, of course, you want that game-changing quarterback. That's what you hope for at the top, and that was just not the case in that draft. You go 2-14, and you don't get the compensation maybe you were hoping for, and ultimately led to Scott Pioli's ouster. Finished up in Atlanta, and now he is in a role where he is out there, and he is an analyst. Now, in today's day and age, and with the new era of college athletics, having a guy like this that has the background. So we have heard more and more the conversation becoming, and what Kirk Ferentz kind of likes maybe about this new era of college football is that it is very getting close to what we see in the NFL. A salary cap, we'll see what the likelihood of that actually being, and all the deals being above board compared to what we dealt with here the last couple of years. We'll see how that actually turns out. But as long as everybody's playing by the rules, everybody is running the same race, I think Kirk Ferentz likes the way that this is set up. And yes, you're going to have to dedicate more money out of your big gob of money that you're throwing out there, right? Your $15 million out of the $20.5 million that the university will able to do. And there's still going to be NIL deals and opportunities for guys to make more money. But when you're going through and you're looking at the way that this is set up, and you bring in a guy with the experience of Scott Pioli, a guy that Kirk Ferentz and him are friends, well-respected, runs very, very deep with them. This is part of that clan that has been together and has talked football for a very long time. I don't think you can say that this is anything other than a positive. even if you're a Chiefs fan. And I'm sorry if that name probably maybe triggers you a little bit. That is absolutely, I know, the case for a lot of people out there. But this is a good thing. It's a good thing to have somebody with the knowledge base that he has. And I think going forward, something that's going to be a good piece. Now, he is not strictly a University of Iowa employee. Also interesting that Beth Getz has a connection to him when he was helping out with UConn football and when she was there. So there's a connection also going to the athletic director and maybe made this a little bit easier to make all of that happen. But I think this is good news. This is something that needs to be looked at as a positive because when we saw that early in the week, I think that was the first thing that kind of jumped out in this new era of college football and college athletics as a whole, and getting a guy with the pedigree of Scott Pioli, a very good thing. Recruiting weekend coming up this weekend. So the weekend of June 20th, Friday, June 20th, that will be the big weekend where they're going to try to get in all the guys that they can for the class of 2026, guys that haven't committed, guys that they feel like they have their best shot of securing their commitment. That is the weekend that they are targeting and have targeted for a long time. Tyler Barnes was on last week on talking with Chad Leistikow on the Hawk Central podcast, part of KXNO, and he mentioned in that one that there's been a little bit of consternation, from the recruiting people out there that, hey, pushing this back into towards the end of June, the timeline needs to change. Tyler Barnes still seems very confident of what they're doing, what they're putting together, and what they're going to be able to secure. But coming up this weekend, starting here on Friday, you're going to have a host of 2027 prospects coming in, guys that'll be getting ready for their junior year of high school. And for a lot of them, this might be their first opportunity to get in there. A couple of top level athletes, though, I want to mention that are going to be making the way to Iowa City this weekend. The first from right here in central Iowa, where I'm located, down in Norwalk, and that is Luke Brewer, a 6'5", 220-pound tight end. And as we talk tight end recruiting, and there's been a lot of misses recently, and it's at times infuriating because we know what tight ends do at the University of Iowa and the opportunity that they're going to have at the next level, and some of the high-level guys that have just bypassed Iowa and guys that Iowa should have a good chance at. But Luke Brewer is a kid from central Iowa, 6'5", 220. Not very often that a kid doesn't even play at the highest level of football in the state of Iowa, down in Class 4A, as we're now up to the 5A system for high school football. Has offers from Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon, Notre Dame, Penn State, and on from there. And it just keeps going and going and going. Don't think there's been a whole lot of those guys coming out of Norwalk that have had those kind of offers. Of course, Iowa and Iowa State are also interested. So Luke Brewer, guy that runs well, got the frame definitely, and watching his highlight videos, definitely a guy to get excited about that tight end position, having an in-state guy like this that you hope can definitely be one. Another one that's coming in this weekend will be Will Slagle. Now, his dad played offensive line at Iowa State. There's a little bit of a hurdle. He has offers from Iowa, Iowa State, Minnesota, Nebraska, Northwestern, Missouri, Stanford, Kansas, K-State, Auburn, Wisconsin, and Arkansas. So a pretty good list there for Will Slagle. And then one more I want to mention, and that is Carter Barrett. So I've seen Carter Barrett a ton. Dowling Catholic kid, called a bunch of their games and another run this season. So Carter Barrett showed up last year as a freshman, and the buzz already was starting in central Iowa. Size, speed, and ability as a freshman. And not just doing it, no offense, at the 1A, 8-player level, but to do it in the CIML, to do it in 5A football and do it at the level that he did, it was absolutely eye-opening. That was a really young offensive line. And Andy Pollack, the offensive line coach there at Dowling, along with the head coach Tom Wilson, did a great job with a very young group of molding them together. And Carter Barrett was a huge part of that. Couldn't have been more impressed than I have been seeing a freshman on the field. And this kid already, before he has even played a snap his sophomore year of high school, has offers from Iowa and Iowa State, Texas A&M, Arkansas, K-State, Ole Miss, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Tennessee, and there's going to be a whole lot more coming through. Keep an eye on him. That is a name to know. Carter Barrett out of Dowling Catholic. We continue Locked On Hawkeyes. We're going to talk a little more about Scott Pioli. We'll get Scott Dochterman's perspective on things from the Athletic and what this house case, what it means for the University of Iowa, for the athletic program. Always great insight from Scott Dochterman. He joins us next on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. There's nothing like the NBA Finals. The intensity, buzzer beaters, fans losing their minds. It's the kind of atmosphere you must experience live, and this year's matchup are already delivering. If you want in, Game Time makes it fast and easy to get seats, even for the biggest games. Prices on the app actually drop closer to tip-off. Killer last-minute deals, panoramic seat views, and no surprise fees. Game Time is a total game changer. Just hopped on the app, taking a look at the zone deals. How about this? 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA Club World Cup matches. And I love that I can see exactly where I'm going to be in the arena, in the stadium. No surprises. No before you buy where you're going to be sitting. The app makes it simple. 2 taps and you're done. And the Game Time guarantee, you know you're getting the best deal. If you find a better price in the same row and section, they'll credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Scott Dochterman covers college football at The Athletic. Of course, got a finger on the Hawkeye pulse as well. See, Scott Pioli was hired today.
So he's been around since the fall, according to the press release. And that was my takeaway right before I saw Doc tweeted out. He beat me to the punch, but yeah, that was an eye-opener.
It was well decorated. I think he got fired after they went 2-14 or something. God, those were the days in Kansas City. Hello, Scott Dochterman. Trent and Ken, how are you?
You know what? I'm doing well. I mean, just to reiterate kind of what you said there about Scott, of course, yes, he did not have a decorated tenure in Kansas City, but, hired him as a consultant is really impactful for Iowa in this new era because you've got a guy who's had, extensive experience at multiple places in the NFL. He first worked with Kirk in Cleveland and Baltimore back in the 90s. I remember talking to Scott in St. Joseph when he was the GM of the Chiefs, and he said he wanted to hire Kirk. That was his guy. That's really hire him as his coach. So they are very close. I've seen Scott at some of their practices and in the building. So he knows fairly intimately Iowa football, or knows enough of it to really help the Hawkeyes across the board, but specifically in football, kind of manage the new era.
So that's fascinating to me because I'm trying to connect some dots. Because when Pioli became GM of the Chiefs, he fired Herm Edwards, and I can't remember who he hired.
Todd Haley. That's exactly right.
So would that have been Ferentz if Pioli would have got his way, do you think?
Yeah, it would have been.
Wow.
Yeah, he thinks the world of Kirk. I mean, just puts him on a pedestal. So I talked to him there, and even his PR people are trying to shoo him away. And he's like, no, I want to keep talking about Kirk. And seen him at practice, talked to him briefly a few times. So yeah, he and Kirk are pretty tight, and Brian worked for him too in New England. So, they all have a pretty close relationship.
Yeah. Pioli was there for the beginning of the Tom Brady, Bill Belichick run, correct? That's when he was there.
Yeah. He was ground floor and worked his way up to vice president of player personnel. He was kind of the machine there. He was a 3-time executive of the year in the NFL. So he's certainly had a good role there when New England, and that he parlayed that just to kind of, I think, branch away and get away from the Belichick era for a little bit. Didn't quite work out, obviously, in Kansas City. And here's one thing, it's a completely different era, but when they did have the opportunity to get a number 1 overall pick, there was no quarterback there for him to take.
Oh, is that Fisher's?
Yeah, when they got, and Eric Fisher was a quality player, but he certainly wasn't a Hall of Famer, which is what you're trying to get with your number 1 pick overall.
That's true.
Todd Haley to Romeo Cornell, and that's where it went, huh? That was the end of Pioli in Kansas City with those 2 hires. What could have been, and boy, it would have been different for Iowa football. Hey, Doc, we wanted to talk a lot about the House settlement and what that kind of means. Before we get into the macro, and Ken and I got a bunch of questions on that, let's go micro. What it means to Iowa, and we can even throw Iowa State into the conversation. What does this mean? Did anything change with what came down on Friday night for Iowa and Iowa State? from what we've talked about here the last couple of months?
It's now official, which I mean, I think everybody, and I've talked to other ADs around the country recently, that everybody's just exhaling now, like finally some structure. We've been wanting this for a while. It's been put on hold and it kind of, we're getting worried about it now. It's there. So now they can execute the strategy that they've planned for. I know Iowa's had one a long time under Beth Getz. I assume, Jamie Pollard's the same way at Iowa State. They're both excellent ADs. So they, for Iowa in the short term, now they can just kind of move forward with their plan. I mean, I think what we're, I would say is, how does the money flow from fans to differently? Before it was to the Swarm Collective, and will people still donate to Swarm? Because it's going to need to be there. This isn't just a magic formula where, now it all goes to the athletic department. The athletic department could spend it on the athletes and all as well. I mean, it really is incumbent to raise money on the side, because you're going to need that to get that quarterback, point guard, whatever. So that to me is going to be, pretty fascinating going forward.
What about Olympic sports, Doc? What does this mean for them? Are they in jeopardy, or are some sports in jeopardy, or is that kind of difficult to answer because every school is going to do things differently, or can they?
Every school will be able to do things differently, and I think this is going to be really another interesting thing to watch is which sports kind of rise or maintain and which ones may fall at different institutions, not just Iowa. And the example that I've given for a while is take women's basketball at Iowa. It's very important. Iowa needs it to be good. It is good, and it needs to stay good. And that's something that you're not going to, try to just, spread around the wealth. You're going to have to focus on a program that you want to be excellent to be there. However, when you look at, say, volleyball, Iowa is a bottom feeder in the best league in the country, and it's going to be hard to even get to the mid-level in that league. Now that could change over, so you're not going to, you're not going to provide them with outstanding resources when you've got to feed women's basketball and other sports. Now that can change over time. If there's a way where they get better very quickly, and maybe they need to execute a different strategy. But then you look at a competitor, their sister program, frankly, is Wisconsin. And women's basketball has lost 31 straight games to Iowa. They're a bottom feeder in the Big Ten in basketball, but they are one of the elite programs in volleyball. They're probably looking at it as similar trajectory, where you want to help out women's basketball, but you have to be good in volleyball. So I think you're going to see more of that throughout like institutions, to where some schools are going to be able to pay a lot for certain sports. Some schools are just going to say, just wear the jersey and try your best. And I think, and one sport, and I've brought it up before, that I've been concerned about, and I'm a little less so now after the region stuff, is baseball, because that's a sport that doesn't cost a lot of money. And we've seen Wisconsin and Iowa State, Northern Iowa have eliminated it. So I think in this situation, you've got to be cognizant that, can baseball flourish? And I think now that they're going to invest $5.8 million in a renovation, I think they're going to give it its best shot. But in 10 years down the road, that remains to be seen.
Doc, as you've mentioned, you've fanned out and you're talking to a lot more people outside of Iowa as your role is growing over there at the Athletic and expanded out. Wrestling, the importance in this state. Wrestling's not going to go away at the University of Iowa as long as the NCAA is still having a championship event for it. But how many teams are they going to be competing with? You look at a sport like men's gymnastics. What is there, 20 programs at the D1 level? Could college wrestling, that's got to be on the chopping block, I would think, for a lot of athletic departments. Not at Iowa, not at Iowa State, but a lot of them out there, you're looking to cut wrestling. Could it be, finish in the top 20? Hope you do, because there's only going to be 20 teams actually wrestling.
Sure. And that's something that we all have to watch for. And I know it's something that everybody's going to wrestle with. I mean, right now, everybody's saying, okay, we've got our money, we're going to continue to maintain this. But as you go, where you look at wrestling and it may cost you $2 million and say, you know what, we'd be better off if we were to move that money into football or even another Olympic sport that's got more potential. I mean, if you're Indiana and you think, well, we can move that into soccer where we're really good, or Minnesota into ice hockey, or, now Minnesota would probably be one that would keep it, but there are a lot of schools, I would say, outside of the 3 or 4 in the Big Ten that you wonder, does this make sense for Michigan State, for Purdue, for Indiana, and Northwestern? And so I think it bears watching. And it used to be because of Title IX, even things out, but now it's all strictly financial, because you want to be good in the sports you're supposed to be good at. And in Iowa, wrestling is very, very important. It's not going anywhere. But if you're Indiana, soccer is really important. You win national titles in soccer. Maybe when you look down the road, it's like, or Maryland, or someplace like that. It's like, let's invest in these sports. And sorry, we just can't do it anymore in wrestling.
Yeah, so many schools good at lacrosse. Big Ten is terrific at hockey. Big East, Hockey East, they're big. You wonder what that's going to do. So you mentioned Title IX. What does this do to Title IX, Doc?
Well, with the roster limits, it's forced schools to actually boost more scholarships towards women's sports, because in effect, you could kind of work around it without the scholarships because you have the numbers. And a lot of them did that with rowing, where it was an equivalency sport. You could have 20 scholarships, and then voila, here's 120 athletes on your team, and you could spread it out, and that's kind of how you skirt it around. Well, now with roster limits, you can't do that, and you're going to have to provide that type of number of scholarships. And the one thing with universities is scholarships have to be proportionate to your male-female student ratio. So I think in Iowa, it's maybe 54% female. So you have to have that type of number on the scholarship front. So they've been in the position of having to add about 20 women's scholarships going into next year. And so that's part of it there. And, and they're trying to cut some costs. I know there have been a few layoffs, not very many, but there have been a few. They're mostly trying to do that with attrition in the athletic department, either people leaving or retiring and not filling their roles. But it's still it's going to be a costly proposition for Iowa, and of course at Iowa State.
So next up is what? Another lawsuit's going to be coming. How does this end? Is it the athletes become employees? Is that kind of the simplest end game to all of this?
That would be one that you would look at in the far distant future as something that could happen. Maybe in the far distant future, I mean like 2 years. You just don't know. I mean, things change so quickly that could be the end all. Now, of course, they don't want to provide. They provide athletes with a lot of different things, but employment status does kind of change the dynamic, and that's what they've been trying to avoid. I'm not so sure, and I've heard it both ways. I'm not so sure that the athletes would want to be officially employees, but that being said, I think they're going to look for protections through Congress. Now that this settlement is in, they can start to go to congressional representatives and ask for antitrust exemption to avoid some of the lawsuits, to maybe be able to implement some things that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So that's probably the next step. But yeah, there's going to be lawsuits. There always is.
Thank you, Scott Dochterman. We'll talk to you next week. Appreciate it, Doc.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day, guys.
Good to talk to you. Scott Dochterman from The Athletic.
Always appreciate the time from Scott Dochterman. Great insight, and a lot of changes certainly happening here in the world of college athletics. Well, the Iowa women's basketball program, how do they stay at an elite level? After the step back a year ago with the loss of Caitlin Clark, well, you need players, and Iowa's in on a couple of stud prospects. We'll talk about that and recruiting as a whole next. It's Locked On Hawkeyes. Trent Condon back with you one final time on the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. And a big thank you to everydayers with us each and every day as we talk Hawkeyes with you. Your team every day right here on the Locked On Network. Well, women's basketball has hit the point now with the class of 2026 where some of the best prospects in the country are starting to narrow down their decisions. A big name earlier this week, McKenna Woljiko, has made her decision that she is down to 4. Her finalists for her services, an elite class of 2026 forward, are South Carolina, Iowa, USC, and Ohio State. Iowa in the mix for an elite level prospect. And there's a bunch of them. And when you look at kind of what Iowa's done, Madeline Mignery is another one that we'll talk about here momentarily. But going back to the top. So Iowa to be involved. So this is something that was relayed to me from somebody in the scouting side of college athletics. And they mentioned to me that it's going to be more of a holding pattern, and why we see so many of the top prospects in women's college basketball that haven't made their commitment yet is because they were waiting for the House settlement case to happen. And to know now, as we've talked about, the $20.5 million and now the athletic departments will be able to hand out. Well, 75, 80% of that's going to go to football. Most of the remaining is going to go to men's basketball. And then after that, it comes for the rest of the sports, including women's basketball, for Iowa, including wrestling and everything else. Tennis, soccer, golf, track and field hockey, on and on and on. Everybody wants a little cut. And though there still will be the NIL component to it, this settlement, now universities have to go, and these coaching staffs, certainly in women's basketball, have the ability to understand exactly what they're going to have. For Iowa to stay relevant, and what do they need to do? And for every dollar that you're putting into women's basketball, for every dollar that you're putting into wrestling, that you're putting into tennis, whatever it is, that's money that isn't there for football and for men's basketball. And we know the two programs. Look, women's basketball has sold out the last couple of years. Cover Hawkeye Arena sold out every single time. And yet they don't turn a profit because of the cost, the travel, and they do not get the same kind of TV money that you have for the other side. So because of that, you have to make these decisions. And we saw the softball team with a new program, a new coach coming in, and a lot of players that they're going to have to replace. Are you going to invest there? Volleyball has been an issue for decades at the University of Iowa. Is it worth even investing money? These are the questions that the University of Iowa, and specifically Beth Getz, has to answer. But back to women's basketball, that's why you see this holding pattern, and now it's probably going to be an onslaught. Now that everybody at least feels like they have an idea of what this is going to look like, what it's going to be. Class of 2027, getting ready for a junior year, Madeline Mignery from down in Florida. 4-star prospect. She is a guard, 6'1", handles it very well. Ranked number 33 by ESPN, 24 player by JR All-Star Basketball, the number 2 player in Florida. This is the reality. Iowa's swimming in these waters, but when you're swimming in these waters with these top-level players and the top-level programs that you're going up against, it's a different one. And it's going to still come down to what they can do financially to be able to compete. There's an opportunity here for women's basketball to thrive at the University of Iowa. What Caitlin Clark said is unlike anything we've seen before. But was it a 2-year blip? Was it a once-in-a-generation talent? And maybe a once-in-everybody's lifetime talent in Caitlin Clark, and that was it? Or is there more there? That is for Jan Jensen to unearth. Not a fun spot to be. Yeah, basketball's fun. The game's fun. Coaching's fun, I'm sure, for Jan. But that part of it, keeping that program and the expectations now that have gone along with it, that's the tough part of the job. Thanks for being with us and making Locked On Hawkeyes your first listen every day. If you're into recruiting and the portal, Brian Smith has you covered. If you are out there looking for more, Brian has you covered with the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. And this is the month for that in the recruiting world. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes of college football with the portal. You can find the portal on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back with you one final time. Tom Kickert set to join us tomorrow on the program. We'll talk with Tom a lot about some of the recruiting aspects that we talked about and dive a little bit deeper. That's coming up tomorrow. Thanks for being with us as always. Hit subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, and a 5-star review on the podcast side. Thank you to all of you, and specifically to everydayers with us each and every day. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Until then, go Hawks.